The sun beat down on Zachary Sullivan's shoulders with the kind of merciless intensity that only a Kansas prairie in July could deliver. And he was about to ride past her entirely when his horse suddenly whinnied and stamped its hooves into the dusty ground. Something about the crumpled shape ahead made his chest tighten with alarm before he could even make sense of what he was seeing. A woman, barefoot and stumbling through the tall grass like a ghost made flesh, her dress torn and sun-bleached nearly white, her dark hair hanging in tangled waves down her back. She moved with the desperate, mechanical gait of someone who had been walking far longer than any human body should endure. Zachary spurred his horse forward, closing the distance between them in seconds. When he drew near enough to call out, his voice came rough from a morning of silence. "Madam. Madam, are you hurt?" She did not seem to hear him at first. Her feet moved through the prairie grass, leaving small trails of blood on the sun-scorched earth. He dismounted quickly, letting the reins fall, trusting his mare to stay ground-tied as he approached the woman on foot. This close, he could see the deep exhaustion carved into her features, the sunburn across her nose and cheeks, the way her lips were cracked and bleeding from thirst. "Madam," he said again, gentler now, reaching out to touch her shoulder. She stopped walking. Her eyes, when they finally focused on him, were the color of storm clouds, gray and churning with something that looked like fear or grief or both. She swayed on her feet, and Zachary moved instinctively to steady her, his hands gripping her arms to keep her upright. "Water," she whispered, the word barely audible. "Yes, of course." He guided her to sit in the grass, then hurried back to his horse for his canteen. When he returned and pressed it to her lips, she drank with desperate gulps that made him pull it away. "Slow now, you will make yourself sick." She nodded, trembling hands reaching for the canteen again. He let her take it, watching as she forced herself to sip more carefully this time. While she drank, he studied her more closely. She could not have been more than 22 or 23, though the ordeal she had suffered made it hard to tell. Her dress had once been fine, he could see that much, though now it was little more than rags. No shoes, no bonnet, no supplies. Whatever had happened to her, it had left her with nothing. "What is your name?" he asked when she finally lowered the canteen. She looked at him with those storm-gray eyes, and for a moment he thought she might not answer. Then her lips moved, forming words he had to lean closer to hear. "Luna. Luna Thatcher. Miss Thatcher." He removed his hat, wiping sweat from his brow. "My name is Zachary Sullivan. Can you tell me what happened to you? Where did you come from?" Her expression shifted, something raw and painful moving across her features. She opened her mouth, closed it, tried again. When she finally spoke, her voice was stronger, though it still shook. "The wagon train. 3 days ago, we were attacked." Zachary felt his stomach drop. He had heard rumors in Ordway about increased raids, though the details were always vague and contradictory. "Attacked by whom?" "Men." She closed her eyes, her whole body shuddering. "White men dressed like outlaws. They came at dawn. They killed everyone. The families, the children, the guide. They took everything and set fire to the wagons. I hid under one of the supply carts, and when night came, I ran." "Lord above," Zachary breathed. "You have been walking for 3 days." "I think so. The days blend together." She looked down at her ruined feet, seeming to notice them for the first time. "I did not know which way to go, I just walked." He had so many questions, but they could wait. Right now, she needed proper care, and the prairie was no place to provide it. "Miss Thatcher, I need to take you to Ordway. That is the nearest town, about 15 miles south of here. Can you ride?" She nodded, though the fear in her eyes suggested she was not entirely sure. Zachary stood and helped her to her feet. She gasped when her weight settled on her torn soles, and without thinking he swept her up into his arms. She was lighter than she should have been, all sharp angles and fragile bones. "I will put you on my horse," he said. "You will ride and I will walk alongside. You do not have to do that." "Yes, madam, I do." He carried her to where his mare waited patiently, then lifted Luna onto the saddle as carefully as he could. She settled there with a quiet whimper, gripping the saddle horn with white knuckles. Zachary gathered the reins and began walking, leading the horse south toward Ordway. They traveled in silence for the first mile. Zachary kept glancing up at her, worried she might faint and fall, but she remained upright, her gaze fixed on some distant point only she could see. The sun continued its relentless assault, and he was grateful when a few clouds drifted across the sky, offering brief moments of shade. "You said they took everything," he said eventually. "Did you have family on that wagon train?" Luna was quiet for so long that he thought she might not answer. Then she said, "My parents died of fever 2 years ago in Ohio. I was traveling west to start over. There was a man in California who had offered me a teaching position. I sold everything I had to afford the journey. I am sorry. I had friends on that train, good people. The Hendersons had 3 children under the age of 10. Mrs. Henderson was teaching me to make sourdough bread." Her voice cracked. "They are all gone now." Zachary swallowed hard against the lump in his throat. The West could be brutal, he had always known that, but hearing the raw grief in her voice made it feel more real, more immediate. "When we get to Ordway, we will report this to the marshal. He will send word to Fort Dodge, get the cavalry involved. Will they catch them, the men who did this?" "I do not know," he admitted, "but they will try." Another silence fell between them. Zachary found himself thinking about his own life, the relative safety of his existence compared to what Luna had endured. He was 26 years old, had been working as a cowhand and occasional scout for the better part of 8 years. He knew the land, knew how to survive in it, knew which dangers to avoid. But even with all that knowledge, he had seen plenty of good people meet bad ends. The West did not care about fairness or justice. It simply was. "Why are you out here alone?" Luna asked, pulling him from his thoughts. "I work at the Garrett Ranch, about 20 miles east of Ordway. I was riding back from delivering a message to another ranch when I spotted you." He glanced up at her. "Lucky timing, I suppose." "Lucky," she repeated, and there was something hollow in the way she said it. "I suppose I should feel lucky to be alive." "You should. You survived something terrible. That takes strength." "I do not feel strong. I feel broken." Zachary stopped walking, turning to look up at her fully. "Miss Thatcher, broken things can heal. And you are alive, which means you still have a chance to heal. Do not discount that." She met his eyes, and for the first time since he had found her, something other than pain flickered in her expression. Curiosity, perhaps, or hope. "You are kind," she said softly. "I am decent, which is not the same thing as kind. There is a difference." "Is there?" "Kind people go out of their way to help. Decent people just do what is right when the opportunity presents itself." He started walking again. "Any decent person would have stopped to help you." "I think you are wrong about that," Luna said, "but I will not argue with you. I am too tired." They continued southward. The sun climbed higher, then began its slow descent toward the western horizon. Zachary shared his canteen with Luna several more times, and when they stopped to rest, he gave her half of the dried beef and hardtack he had in his saddlebag. She ate slowly, wincing with each swallow as if her throat hurt. "How much farther?" she asked as they resumed their journey. "Another 6 miles or so. We should reach town before sunset if we keep a steady pace." "Tell me about Ordway," she said. "What kind of place is it?" Zachary considered the question. "Small. Maybe 300 people on a good day. There is a general store, a church, a saloon, a hotel, a smithy. Marshall has an office next to the jail. Most folks are farmers or ranchers trying to make an honest living. It is not fancy, but it is decent enough. Do you live there? No, I live on the Garrett Ranch, like I said, but I come into town fairly often for supplies or to deliver messages. I know most of the people and they know me. Will they help me? A stranger with no money and no prospects. They will help you, Zachary said firmly. We may be rough around the edges out here, but we take care of our own. And you are one of us now, whether you plan to be or not. She did not respond, but when he looked up, he saw tears sliding down her cheeks. She wiped them away quickly, as if embarrassed, but Zachary pretended not to notice. He figured she had earned the right to cry without being watched. The landscape began to change as they drew closer to Ordway. The endless prairie gave way to scattered homesteads, small farms with fields of wheat and corn rippling in the breeze. They passed a family working in their garden, and the farmer raised a hand in greeting. Zachary waved back, noting the way the man's wife stared at Luna with open curiosity. Word will spread fast, he warned. Small towns are like that. Everyone will know about you by morning. What will they think of me? They will think you are a survivor. They will think you are brave. He paused. And some of them will want to know every detail of what happened, which you do not have to share if you do not want to. Thank you for telling me. Ordway appeared on the horizon as the sun began to paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was not much to look at, just a collection of wooden buildings clustered along a single main street, but to Zachary, it represented safety. He picked up his pace, eager to get Luna somewhere she could rest properly. They entered town from the north, passing the church first. Reverend Matthews was outside tending to his small garden, and he straightened when he saw them, his weathered face creasing with concern. "Zachary Sullivan, what have you got there?" he called out. "Reverend, this is Miss Luna Thatcher. She needs help. Her wagon train was attacked 3 days ago." The Reverend's expression shifted from curiosity to alarm. He dropped his gardening tools and hurried over. "Attacked? Good Lord. Bring her to the boarding house. My wife will know what to do. I will fetch Doc Henderson." "Thank you, Reverend." They continued down the main street, drawing stares from everyone they passed. Zachary led his horse directly to the boarding house, a 2-story building with a faded sign that read, "Mrs. Crawford's Rooms." Before they even reached the porch, the front door flew open and a stout woman with graying hair emerged, her eyes sharp and assessing. "Zachary Sullivan, what trouble have you brought to my doorstep?" Mrs. Crawford demanded, though her tone was more concerned than accusatory. "No trouble, madam. This is Miss Luna Thatcher. She has been through a terrible ordeal and needs a place to rest. Reverend Matthews is fetching the doctor." Mrs. Crawford's demeanor changed instantly. She bustled down the steps, reaching up to help Luna dismount. "Come here, child. Let us get you inside and cleaned up. Lord above, look at your feet. Zachary, bring her in, will you?" Zachary lifted Luna down from the saddle once more, and this time she seemed to accept his help more readily, her arms circling his neck as he carried her up the steps and into the boarding house. The interior was neat and simple, with a small sitting room off to one side and a narrow staircase leading up to the second floor. "Take her upstairs, first room on the right," Mrs. Crawford instructed, already moving to the kitchen. "I will bring water and bandages." Zachary climbed the stairs carefully, mindful of Luna's injuries. The room Mrs. Crawford had indicated was small but clean, with a single bed covered in a faded quilt, a washstand, and a chair by the window. He laid Luna down gently, stepping back as soon as she was settled. "Thank you," she whispered, her eyes already beginning to close. "Rest now, the doctor will be here soon." He turned to leave, but her hand shot out, catching his wrist. "Zachary, will you stay? Just until the doctor arrives. I do not want to be alone." The vulnerability in her voice made his chest tighten. "Of course, I will be right here." He pulled the chair closer to the bed and sat down, still holding her hand. She relaxed visibly, her breathing beginning to even out. Mrs. Crawford arrived a few moments later with a basin of water and clean cloths, followed closely by Reverend Matthews and Dr. Henderson. Doc Henderson was a thin man in his 50s with gentle hands and a no-nonsense manner. He shooed everyone except Mrs. Crawford out of the room, insisting that Luna needed privacy for her examination. Zachary found himself pacing in the hallway, unable to shake the image of Luna's broken, bleeding feet. When the doctor finally emerged, his expression was grave. "She is severely dehydrated and malnourished. Her feet are badly torn up and she has some infected cuts that will need careful tending. But she is young and strong. With proper care and rest, she should make a full recovery." "Thank God," Zachary breathed. "Mrs. Crawford has agreed to let her stay here as long as needed. I will check on her daily." Doc Henderson fixed Zachary with a steady look. "She told me a bit about what happened to her wagon train. That is a serious matter. You will need to speak with Marshal Garrett." "I plan to first thing in the morning." "Good man." The doctor clapped him on the shoulder. "You did a fine thing today, Zachary. You likely saved her life." After the doctor and Reverend left, Mrs. Crawford allowed Zachary to look in on Luna one more time. She was asleep now, her face peaceful despite the bandages wrapped around her feet. Watching her, Zachary felt a strange protectiveness rise in his chest. He barely knew this woman, but he could not shake the feeling that finding her had meant something, that their paths had crossed for a reason. "You can come back tomorrow, Mrs. Crawford said gently, pulling him away from the doorway. "She needs sleep more than anything right now." Zachary nodded, though leaving felt wrong somehow. He retrieved his horse from where she was tied outside and rode slowly through town, his mind churning with everything that had happened. By the time he reached the marshal's office, full darkness had fallen, and lamplight glowed in the windows. Marshal James Garrett was a hard man in his 50s who had kept the peace in Ordway for nearly a decade. He looked up from his desk when Zachary entered, his thick eyebrows rising in surprise. "Zachary, what brings you by this late?" Zachary told him everything, from finding Luna on the prairie to her story about the wagon train massacre. Marshal Garrett's face grew darker with each detail. 3 days ago, you say? That would put the attack somewhere northeast of here." "That is my guess, yes, sir." The marshal stood, moving to a map on his wall. He studied it for a long moment, his jaw tight. "This is the third attack in 2 months. Always the same pattern, always white men dressed as outlaws, always complete destruction. No survivors until now. You think it is the same group?" "I do, and I think they have been getting bolder." Marshal Garrett turned back to Zachary. "I will send word to Fort Dodge tonight, get a cavalry unit out here to investigate. In the meantime, keep an eye on Miss Thatcher. If she is the only survivor, she might be able to identify these men. You think they might come after her? I think we cannot be too careful." Zachary left the marshal's office with a knot of worry in his gut. He had not considered that Luna might still be in danger, but now that the marshal had planted the seed, he could not shake it. Instead of riding back to the Garrett ranch, he headed to the saloon and rented a room above it for the night. It was not much, just a bed and a washstand, but it meant he could be close by if Luna needed anything. He slept poorly, his dreams filled with images of burning wagons and desperate cries. When dawn finally broke, he was up and dressed in minutes, splashing water on his face before heading out into the quiet morning streets. Mrs. Crawford's boarding house was already awake, smoke rising from the chimney. Zachary knocked softly, and the landlady herself answered, still wearing her nightcap. "She is awake," Mrs. Crawford said before he could ask. Had some broth and bread earlier. Doc Henderson has already been by to change her bandages. You can go up if you like. Zachary climbed the stairs, his boots heavy on the wooden steps. He knocked gently on Luna's door, and her voice called out for him to enter. She was sitting up in bed, propped against several pillows, looking marginally better than she had the day before. Her hair had been washed and braided, and someone had given her a clean nightgown to wear. But it was the alertness in her eyes that reassured him most. She was present in a way she had not been yesterday. "Good morning," he said, removing his hat. "Good morning, Zachary." She smiled, and it transformed her whole face. "Mrs. Crawford told me you arranged all of this, that you paid for the doctor and the room. It was nothing. It was everything." Her voice caught. "I do not know how to repay you. You do not need to repay me. I just wanted to make sure you were all right." He moved closer, taking the chair beside her bed again. "How are you feeling?" "Better. Sore and tired, but better." She gestured to her bandaged feet. "Doc Henderson says I should not try to walk for at least a week. The infections need time to heal." "That is wise. You pushed yourself hard enough already." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Luna said, "I have been thinking about what you asked yesterday, about what happened. There is something I did not tell you, something important." Zachary leaned forward. "What is it?" She took a deep breath, her hands twisting in the quilt. "Before I ran, while I was hiding under the wagon, I heard the men talking. They were arguing about whether to go after someone specific, and one of them said a name." "What name?" Luna's storm-gray eyes met his, and he saw fear flickering there. "They said Garrett. They said we should have gone after Garrett first. Now he will know." Zachary felt his blood run cold. "Garrett, as in Marshall Garrett, I do not know, maybe, but when I heard that name, I memorized it. I thought it might be important. It is important, very important." Zachary stood, pacing the small room. "Marshall Garrett is investigating these attacks. If these outlaws mentioned him by name, they might be targeting him specifically, or someone with that name." "There is more," Luna said quietly. "One of the men, the leader, I think, he had a distinctive voice, very deep with a slight accent I could not place, and he mentioned something about a shipment coming through next month, something valuable. He said it would be their biggest score yet." Zachary stopped pacing. "Luna, this information could help catch these men. Will you tell the marshal what you just told me?" She nodded, though he could see the effort it cost her. "Yes, if it helps stop them from hurting anyone else, I will tell him everything I know. I will fetch him. Stay here and rest." He found Marshal Garrett at his office, already dealing with the morning's business. When Zachary relayed what Luna had told him, the marshal's expression turned grim. "Garrett," he muttered. "That could be me, or it could be referring to the Garrett ranch where you work. Charles Garrett has his share of enemies. Should we warn him? I will send a rider out today. In the meantime, I need to speak with Miss Thatcher myself." They returned to the boarding house together. Luna repeated her story for the marshal, her voice steady despite the way her hands trembled. Marshal Garrett listened intently, occasionally asking clarifying questions. "You have done a brave thing, Miss Thatcher," he said when she finished. "This information could be crucial to catching these men. I want you to know that I will do everything in my power to keep you safe." "Thank you, Marshal." After Marshal Garrett left, Zachary remained with Luna. She seemed drained by the retelling, her face pale and drawn. He poured her a glass of water from the pitcher on the washstand, holding it steady while she drank. "I am frightened," she admitted quietly. "What if they find out I survived? What if they come looking for me?" "They will not get to you," Zachary said firmly. "I will make sure of that. You cannot stay here every moment. You have your own life, your own work. Then I will arrange for someone to be with you when I cannot." He set the glass down, taking her hand in his. "Luna, I know we just met, but I feel responsible for you, not in a bad way, but in a way that matters. I will not let anything happen to you." She squeezed his hand, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "Why are you being so kind to me?" "Because you deserve kindness. Because what happened to you was wrong and I want to help make it right." He paused, searching for the right words. "And because when I saw you out there on the prairie, something in me recognized something in you. I cannot explain it better than that." "I felt it too," she whispered. "When you found me, when you spoke to me, I felt safe for the first time in days." They sat there, hands joined, neither speaking. Outside, Ordway was waking up fully, the sounds of commerce and daily life drifting through the open window. But in that small room, time seemed to slow, creating a bubble of peace around them. Over the next several days, a routine developed. Zachary would spend his mornings at the Garrett Ranch, handling his normal duties, then ride into Ordway each afternoon to check on Luna. He brought her books from the general store, wildflowers from the prairie, news from around town. They would sit together for hours, talking about everything and nothing. Luna told him about her childhood in Ohio, about her parents and the small schoolhouse where her mother had taught. She spoke of her dreams of becoming a teacher herself, of the future she had been building toward before the attack shattered everything. Zachary shared his own story in return. He told her about growing up on a struggling farm in Missouri, about losing his father to a farming accident when he was 16, about how he had come west seeking opportunity and found hard work instead. He spoke of the satisfaction he found in ranching, in working with horses, in the simple honesty of physical labor. "Do you ever want more?" Luna asked one afternoon. They were sitting on the porch of the boarding house, Luna in a rocking chair with her feet propped on a stool, Zachary perched on the railing. "More of what?" "More than being a ranch hand. Do you ever think about owning your own land, having your own place?" Zachary considered the question. "Sometimes, but land is expensive and I am still saving. Maybe someday if I am lucky." "You should do it," Luna said firmly. "You are young and strong and capable. You should build something for yourself." "Maybe you are right," he smiled at her. "What about you? Do you still want to teach?" Her expression grew wistful. "I do not know. Everything I was working toward feels so far away now. California might as well be on the moon." "You could teach here," Zachary suggested. "Ordway does not have a proper school. The children just learn what their parents can teach them, or from the reverend on Sundays. You could change that." "I have no money to start a school." "You could talk to the town council. They might be willing to help, especially if it means better education for the children." Luna was quiet for a long moment, her gaze distant. Then she said, "Maybe I will. After I heal, after things settle down. Maybe I will." As Luna's physical wounds began to heal, Zachary noticed other changes too. The haunted look in her eyes grew less pronounced. She smiled more easily, laughed at his clumsy attempts at humor. Color returned to her cheeks and her voice regained its strength, but there were still hard moments. Sometimes Zachary would arrive to find her staring out the window with tears on her face, lost in memories of the friends she had lost. Other times, a sudden noise would make her flinch violently, her whole body going rigid with fear. During those moments, Zachary would simply sit with her, offering his presence as comfort. He learned not to ask too many questions, not to push her to talk when she was not ready. Instead, he would tell her stories about his work at the ranch, about the foals being born that spring, about the time he had accidentally roped a skunk instead of a calf. 2 weeks after Zachary found her, Luna was finally able to stand and take a few tentative steps. Doc Henderson declared her well enough to begin moving around more, though he cautioned her to take it slowly. Mrs. Crawford found her a pair of soft leather slippers that did not irritate her healing feet, and Luna wore them gratefully. That afternoon, Zachary took her for a short walk down the main street. It was her first time really seeing Ordway, and she looked around with interest, taking in the modest buildings and the people going about their business. "It is smaller than I expected," she said, not unkindly. "Small but honest," Zachary replied. "Everyone here works hard and looks out for each other. It is a good place." They stopped at the general store where the owner, Mr. Peters, greeted Luna warmly. His wife insisted on giving Luna a new dress, refusing to accept any payment. "We take care of our own," Mrs. Peters said, echoing what Zachary had told Luna that first day. "You are part of this community now, dear. Let us help." Luna accepted the dress with tears in her eyes, hugging Mrs. Peters tightly. Watching them, Zachary felt a warmth spread through his chest. This was what he loved about Ordway, about the West in general. People might be rough and life might be hard, but there was a fundamental decency that ran through it all. As they continued their walk, they ran into Marshall Garrett coming out of his office. His expression was serious, and Zachary felt a flicker of concern. "Miss Thatcher, Zachary, I was just about to send someone to fetch you both." The marshal gestured for them to follow him inside. "We have had some developments." Inside the office, Marshal Garrett spread a map across his desk. "The cavalry went out to investigate the area where your wagon train was attacked. They found the remains of the wagons and buried the dead properly. They also found tracks heading southwest toward the Colorado border." "Did they follow them?" Zachary asked. "As far as they could." "The trail went cold near the Arkansas River, but they did find something interesting." Marshal Garrett pulled out a piece of burned cloth. "This was at the site. It is part of a uniform military issue, specifically Union cavalry," Luna gasped. "You think soldiers attacked us?" "I think someone wants us to think that," the marshal said carefully. "But the cavalry commander I spoke with says none of his men are unaccounted for. It is more likely that these outlaws stole uniforms to throw off pursuit." "That is clever," Zachary said grimly. "If people think it is rogue soldiers, they will be looking in the wrong direction." "Exactly." Marshal Garrett turned to Luna. "Miss Thatcher, I need to ask you something difficult. Do you think you could recognize any of these men if you saw them again?" Luna's face went pale. "I never saw their faces clearly. I was hiding and it was chaos. But the voice, the one I told you about, I would recognize that voice anywhere." "That is something at least." The marshal rolled up the map. "I want you both to be careful, stay alert. If you see or hear anything suspicious, come to me immediately." As they left the marshal's office, Zachary noticed how quiet Luna had become. He offered her his arm, and she took it gratefully, leaning against him as they walked back toward the boarding house. "This is never going to be over, is it?" she said softly. "I am always going to be looking over my shoulder." "It will be over when we catch them," Zachary said, "and we will catch them. Justice might move slowly out here, but it moves. I want to believe that. Then believe it. And in the meantime, focus on healing. Focus on building a life here in Ordway." He paused, then added quietly, "Focus on the good things." She looked up at him, her gray eyes searching his face. "You are a good thing, Zachary Sullivan. I hope you know that." His heart stuttered in his chest. "You are a good thing too, Luna Thatcher." They stood there on the street, the afternoon sun warm on their shoulders, and something unspoken passed between them. It was too soon, Zachary told himself. She had been through too much trauma. But the feeling was there nonetheless, growing stronger each day they spent together. That evening, after he had seen Luna safely back to the boarding house, Zachary rode out to the Garrett ranch for a conversation he had been putting off. He found Charles Garrett, the ranch owner, in the main house going over the accounts. Charles was a stern man in his early 40s with gray streaking his temples and a reputation for fairness. He looked up when Zachary knocked on the open door of his study. "Zachary, come in. I hear you have been spending a lot of time in town lately." "Yes, sir. I wanted to talk to you about that." Zachary removed his hat, turning it nervously in his hands. "I have been helping a young woman who was attacked, Luna Thatcher. She is staying at Mrs. Crawford's boarding house while she recovers." "I heard about that. Terrible business." Charles leaned back in his chair. "Marshall came by to warn me that my name might have been mentioned by the attackers. You think there is a connection?" "I do not know, sir. But I wanted you to be aware, and I wanted to ask permission to keep spending time in town. Luna needs someone to look after her, and I would like to be that person." Charles studied him for a long moment. "You are sweet on her." It was not a question, but Zachary answered anyway. "Yes, sir, I believe I am." "Well, you have always been a good worker, and I trust your judgment. Just make sure your duties here do not suffer. As long as you keep up your end, I have no problem with you spending your afternoons in town." "Thank you, sir. I appreciate that." As Zachary left the main house, he felt as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Having Charles's blessing meant he could continue seeing Luna without worrying about losing his job. It meant he could start thinking about a future that included her. The thought terrified and thrilled him in equal measure. June turned into July, and Luna continued to improve. Her feet healed completely, leaving only faint scars as reminders of her ordeal. She began helping Mrs. Crawford around the boarding house, cooking and cleaning to earn her keep. She also started talking seriously about the idea of opening a school. Zachary helped her compose a letter to the town council, outlining her qualifications and her vision for education in Ordway. They submitted it together, and a week later, the council invited her to present her ideas at their next meeting. The night before the meeting, Zachary found Luna pacing nervously in the sitting room of the boarding house. She had borrowed a dress from Mrs. Crawford, a simple blue calico that brought out the color of her eyes, and she was wringing her hands as she muttered to herself. "You are going to be wonderful," Zachary said, catching her hands to still them. "What if they say no? What if they think I am not qualified enough? Then they are fools, and we will find another way." He pulled her closer, his thumbs rubbing gentle circles on the backs of her hands. "Luna, you are smart and capable and passionate about teaching. They would be lucky to have you." She looked up at him, and in that moment, with the lamplight casting shadows across her face, Zachary thought she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Before he could think better of it, he leaned down and kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, tentative and sweet. Luna froze for a heartbeat, then melted against him, her hands coming up to rest on his chest. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. "I have been wanting to do that for weeks," Zachary admitted. "I have been wanting you to," Luna whispered. "I was just afraid to hope that you felt the same way I do." "How do you feel?" "Like I am falling in love with you, like you are the best thing that has happened to me in a very long time." She paused. "Is that too fast? Too soon?" "No." Zachary cupped her face in his hands. "No, it is not too fast. I am falling in love with you too, Luna. Have been since the moment I found you on that prairie." They kissed again, deeper this time with months of unspoken feelings pouring into it. When they finally broke apart, they were both smiling. "I should let you rest," Zachary said reluctantly. "You have a big day tomorrow. Stay a little longer. Please." They settled onto the sofa, Luna tucked against Zachary's side, his arm around her shoulders. They talked quietly about the future, about possibilities and dreams. Luna spoke about the school she wanted to build, about the children she hoped to teach. Zachary talked about saving enough money to buy land, about maybe starting a small ranch of his own someday. "We could do it together," Luna suggested. "Build something together." "I would like that," Zachary said. "I would like that very much." The town council meeting went better than either of them had dared to hope. Luna presented her ideas with confidence and passion, outlining a curriculum and explaining how education would benefit the entire community. The council members asked thoughtful questions, and by the end of the meeting, they had agreed to provide a small building and a modest salary to start Ordway's first official school. Luna was radiant with joy as they left the meeting. She threw her arms around Zachary right there on the street, not caring who saw them. "We did it," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "We actually did it." "You did it," Zachary corrected. "I just stood there looking proud." "No, you helped me every step of the way. I could not have done this without you." They celebrated that night with dinner at the small restaurant next to the hotel. It was nothing fancy, just steak and potatoes and coffee, but it felt special. They sat across from each other, holding hands across the table, talking about everything they needed to do to get the school ready for the fall term, but their happiness was short-lived. 2 days later, Marshal Garrett came to find them with troubling news. "There has been another attack," he said grimly. "A freight wagon heading to Fort Dodge. Same pattern as before, complete destruction, no survivors, or so they thought." "What do you mean, so they thought?" Zachary asked. "The cavalry found someone alive. A young man, badly injured but conscious enough to talk. And Miss Thatcher, he described hearing the same voice you mentioned. The deep one with the accent." Luna went pale. "Did he see them?" "He saw one of them, got a good look at his face before he was shot. The cavalry has a sketch artist working with him now to create a likeness. Once they have it, they will distribute it to all the towns in the region." "That is good news, is it not?" Zachary said. "If we have a description, we have a better chance of catching them." "Yes, but it also means the stakes just got higher. These men have killed a lot of people and they are getting more aggressive. I want extra precautions taken." Marshal Garrett looked at Luna. "I think you should stay somewhere with more security until we catch these men." "Where would I go?" "The boarding house is my home now." "You could stay at the ranch," Zachary suggested. "Charles Garrett has several hands who could keep watch. It would be safer than being in town." Luna looked uncertain. "I do not want to impose." "You would not be imposing." "I will talk to Charles, explain the situation. He is a good man. He will understand." After some convincing, Luna agreed. That afternoon, Zachary rode out to the Garrett ranch and explained the situation to his boss. As expected, Charles immediately agreed to provide Luna with a room and protection. "Bring her out tomorrow," Charles said. "My wife Martha will be glad for the female company. Gets lonely out here for her sometimes." The next morning, Zachary arrived at the boarding house with a wagon to transport Luna's few belongings. Mrs. Crawford was tearful at the goodbye but agreed it was for the best. "You come back and visit, you hear," the older woman said, hugging Luna tightly. "And that school better be ready come September. Those children need you." The ride out to the ranch took about an hour. Luna sat beside Zachary on the wagon seat, taking in the rolling prairie and the distant line of cottonwoods that marked the creek running through the Garrett property. "It is beautiful out here," she said. "Peaceful." "It is. This land gets into your blood after a while. Makes you never want to leave." At the ranch, they were greeted by Martha Garrett, a kind woman in her late 30s with laugh lines around her eyes. She welcomed Luna warmly, showing her to a small but comfortable room in the main house. "You are safe here, dear," Martha said. "Charles and his men will make sure of that. And I, for one, am delighted to have another woman around. Lord knows I get tired of talking to cowboys all day." Luna settled into ranch life with surprising ease. She helped Martha with the cooking and the household chores, and in her free time, She worked on planning her school curriculum. Zachary saw her every day, sometimes stealing a few moments alone with her in the evening after his work was done. Their relationship deepened during those summer weeks. They learned each other's rhythms, each other's hopes and fears. Zachary taught Luna to ride properly, taking her out on gentle trails around the ranch. Luna taught him about literature and history, sharing the books she had been reading. One evening, they were sitting on the porch of the main house, watching the sun set over the prairie. Luna's hand was in Zachary's, and they were talking about nothing in particular when she suddenly grew serious. "Zachary, can I ask you something? Anything. Do you think about the future?" "Our future specifically," he turned to look at her. "All the time. Why do you ask?" "Because I do too. And I know it has only been a few months, but I feel like I have known you forever, like we were meant to find each other." She paused. "Is it crazy to think about marriage after such a short time?" Zachary's heart began to pound. "No, it is not crazy out here. People make decisions fast because life is uncertain. If you find something good, you hold on to it." "Is this good, what we have?" "It is the best thing I have ever had." He shifted on the bench, turning to face her fully. "Luna Thatcher, I love you. I know I should probably wait longer to say that, should give us more time, but I do not want to wait. I love you and I want to build a life with you." Tears welled in Luna's eyes. "I love you too, Zachary. So much it scares me sometimes." "Then do not be scared. Be brave like you were when you survived that attack. Be brave enough to believe in us." "I am." She leaned forward, pressing her forehead to his. "I am brave enough. I want to marry you, Zachary Sullivan." He kissed her then, soft and reverent, sealing the promise they were making to each other. When they pulled apart, both of them were grinning like fools. "I do not have a ring," Zachary said. "I should have planned this better." "I do not need a ring right now, I just need you." They spent the rest of the evening making plans. They would wait until after the school year started, giving Luna time to establish herself as a teacher. In the meantime, Zachary would save every penny he could to buy them a small piece of land. They would build a house together, start a family together, grow old together. It all felt wonderfully, impossibly real. The sketch of the outlaw arrived a week later. Marshal Garrett rode out to the ranch personally to show it to Luna, and Zachary stood beside her as she studied the rough drawing. "I do not recognize his face," she admitted. "But I only saw them from a distance, and I was terrified. I am sorry I cannot be more help." "You have been plenty of help, Miss Thatcher. This sketch will be distributed to every law enforcement officer in Kansas and Colorado. Someone will recognize him eventually." But days turned into weeks with no news. The school building was prepared and furnished, and Luna began preparing in earnest for her first class. She ordered books from a supplier in Kansas City, using the money the town council had allocated. She decorated the one-room schoolhouse with maps and slates and a large blackboard. Zachary helped her however he could, building shelves for the books and fixing the broken windows. Watching her come alive with purpose filled him with joy. This was the future they had talked about, taking shape in real time. The school was set to open on the first Monday in September. 2 days before, Zachary rode into Ordway to pick up a delivery of supplies. He was at the general store, loading sacks of flour into his wagon, when he heard it. A voice, deep and rough with a slight accent he could not place. Zachary's blood ran cold. He turned slowly, trying to locate the source of the voice. A group of men stood outside the saloon, 3 of them talking and laughing. One was tall and broad-shouldered, with a thick beard and a hat pulled low over his eyes. Moving as casually as he could, Zachary finished loading his wagon and then headed straight for the marshal's office. His heart was pounding so hard he thought it might burst from his chest. Marshal Garrett was at his desk, and he looked up in surprise when Zachary burst through the door. "What is wrong?" The voice, Zachary said breathlessly. "The one Luna described. I just heard it outside the saloon." The marshal was on his feet instantly. "Are you sure?" "I am sure." The accent, the depth of it, everything matches what she said. "Stay here." Marshal Garrett grabbed his rifle and headed out into the street. Zachary followed despite the order to stay put, keeping a safe distance as the marshal approached the group of men outside the saloon. "Afternoon, gentlemen," Marshal Garrett said casually. "Just doing my rounds. Can I ask your names and your business in Ordway?" The men looked at each other. The tall one with the beard spoke, and Zachary's suspicions were confirmed. That voice, that unmistakable voice. "Just passing through, Marshal, heading south to find work." "Is that so? And where are you coming from?" "Colorado Territory. Been working some mining claims up there, but they dried up." Marshal Garrett nodded slowly, his eyes sharp. "I am going to need you gentlemen to come with me to my office. Just routine questions. Nothing to worry about." The tension in the air changed instantly. The bearded man's hand drifted toward his gun, and Zachary saw the marshal's finger move to the trigger of his rifle. "I would not do that if I were you," Marshal Garrett said calmly. "I have got 5 deputies positioned around this street, all of them with rifles trained on you right now. You do not have a chance." It was a bluff. Zachary knew there were not 5 deputies. But the outlaws did not know that, and after a long, tense moment, the bearded man raised his hands. "All right, Marshal. No need for trouble." Marshal Garrett had them drop their weapons and marched them to the jail. Zachary helped collect their guns and followed, his mind racing. Once the men were locked in cells, the marshal sent Zachary to fetch Luna. "If she can identify that voice definitively, we have got them," Marshal Garrett said. Zachary rode back to the ranch at a gallop. He found Luna in the kitchen with Martha, rolling out pie dough. When she saw his face, she immediately set down her rolling pin. "What is it? What happened?" "The marshal has arrested 3 men. One of them has the voice you described. He needs you to come identify him." All the color drained from Luna's face. "Now. Now." She removed her apron with shaking hands. Martha insisted on coming along for support, and the 3 of them rode back to Ordway together. At the marshal's office, Luna hesitated before going inside. "I can do this," she said, more to herself than to anyone else. "I need to do this." Inside, Marshal Garrett had the 3 prisoners in separate cells. He positioned Luna where she could hear but not be seen, then had him bring each man to the front of his cell one at a time to speak. The first 2 men said only a few words before Luna shook her head. But when the 3rd man spoke, the bearded one with the deep voice, Luna grabbed Zachary's arm so hard her nails dug into his skin. "That is him," she whispered. "That is the voice I heard." Marshal Garrett nodded grimly. With Luna's identification and the sketch that matched the bearded man's appearance, they had enough to hold the prisoners and send for a judge. Over the next few days, more evidence emerged. Stolen goods were found in the men's saddlebags, including a locket that had belonged to one of the women killed in Luna's wagon train attack. The trial was swift. All 3 men were found guilty and sentenced to hang. Justice, as Zachary had promised Luna, moved slowly but surely. On the day of the hanging, Luna chose not to attend. Instead, she was at the schoolhouse, making final preparations for the opening the next day. Zachary found her there in the late afternoon, arranging books on the shelves. "It is done," he said quietly. "They are gone." Luna set down the book she was holding and turned to him. "I thought I would feel different. Relieved, maybe, or vindicated, but I just feel sad. Sad for everyone they hurt, sad for the lives that were lost." She paused. "And sad that human beings are capable of such cruelty." Zachary crossed the room and pulled her into his arms. "You get to decide what comes next. You get to choose whether their cruelty defines you or whether you rise above it. And from where I am standing, you have already risen so far above it they cannot even see you anymore." She looked up at him, her gray eyes shining. "I love you, Zachary Sullivan. I love you too, Luna Thatcher. And tomorrow you are going to change lives. Those children are so lucky to have you." The next morning, Luna stood at the front of her new classroom and welcomed 14 students ranging in age from 6 to 13. She was nervous. Zachary could see that from where he stood at the back of the room, but she was also radiant with purpose. He watched her teach that first lesson, saw the way she engaged the children with patience and enthusiasm, and he knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Over the following weeks, the school flourished. Parents reported that their children were learning more than they ever had before. The town council increased Luna's salary and began discussing plans to expand the school building. Luna herself bloomed with the work, coming home each day tired but happy. Zachary, meanwhile, had been working on a secret project. He had saved nearly every dollar he earned for the past 6 months, and with some additional help from a loan arranged through Charles Garrett, he had purchased 20 acres of land just outside Ordway. It was not much, but it was enough for a small house and room for horses and a garden. He wanted to tell Luna, wanted to share his excitement, but he was waiting for the right moment. That moment came in late October on a crisp Saturday afternoon. He borrowed a wagon from the ranch and drove Luna out to see the land, telling her only that he had a surprise. When they arrived at the property, Luna looked around in confusion. "What are we doing here?" Zachary helped her down from the wagon, then took both her hands in his. "Luna Thatcher, you have made me the happiest man alive just by existing. You are smart and strong and kind, and every day I wake up grateful that I found you on that prairie. I want to spend the rest of my life making you as happy as you have made me." He dropped to one knee, pulling a simple gold band from his pocket. He had bought it from the jeweler in town, spending more than he probably should have, but he wanted her to have something beautiful. "Will you marry me? Will you build a life here with me on this land, in this place we can call our own?" Tears streamed down Luna's face, but she was smiling. "Yes, yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and kissed her. Around them, the prairie grass swayed in the breeze, and the sun shone warm on their shoulders. It was perfect. They were married in November in a simple ceremony at the church in Ordway. The whole town turned out to celebrate. Mrs. Crawford cried through the entire ceremony. Charles and Martha Garrett stood as witnesses. Reverend Matthews pronounced them husband and wife, and when Zachary kissed his bride, the assembled crowd erupted in cheers. The reception was held at the saloon, which had been cleaned and decorated for the occasion. There was music and dancing and more food than Zachary had seen in one place since coming west. Luna wore a dress that Mrs. Peters had sewn for her, a beautiful creation of cream-colored silk with tiny pearls sewn into the bodice. She was the most beautiful thing Zachary had ever seen. They spent their wedding night in the hotel, and then the next morning they began the work of building their home. Charles Garrett gave Zachary time off to focus on construction, and several of the ranch hands volunteered to help. The house went up quickly, a simple 2-room structure with a stone fireplace and real glass windows. Luna continued teaching while the house was being built, and Zachary split his time between construction and his duties at the ranch. By Christmas, the house was finished enough to move into, and they spent their first night in their new home wrapped in blankets by the fire, talking about the future. "I want children," Luna said, her head resting on Zachary's shoulder. "At least 3 or 4. 3 or 4, Zachary laughed. "You have given this some thought." "I have. I want our house to be full of noise and laughter and love. I want to give our children the kind of childhood I had before my parents died, full of security and happiness." "Then that is what we will do," Zachary promised. "We will fill this house with love." Their first child, a son, was born the following September. They named him Thomas after Luna's father, and he was perfect. Zachary held his son for the first time and felt his heart expand in ways he had not known were possible. Luna took a few weeks off from teaching after Thomas was born, but then she was back at the schoolhouse with the baby in a basket beside her desk. The students adored little Thomas, and the older girls would take turns helping care for him during recess. 2 years later, their daughter was born. They named her Sarah, and she had her mother's gray eyes and her father's stubborn streak. The house that had once seemed so spacious now felt full in the best possible way. Zachary expanded their land holdings gradually, buying adjacent parcels as they became available. He started breeding horses, developing a reputation for quality animals. The work was hard but satisfying, and every night he came home to a house filled with love and laughter. Luna's school continued to grow. After 5 years, the town built a larger building to accommodate all the students, and they hired a second teacher to help with the workload. Luna became known throughout the region as an excellent educator, and families sometimes moved to Ordway specifically so their children could attend her school. Their third child, another son they named William, was born when Thomas was 5, and Sarah was 3. The house was chaos, but it was beautiful chaos. Zachary would sit on the porch in the evenings, watching his children play in the yard while Luna sat beside him, and he would marvel at how much his life had changed. "You ever think about that day I found you?" he asked one evening. "About how different things could have been." Luna squeezed his hand. "Sometimes. I think about how close I came to dying out there, and then I look at all of this and I cannot believe how blessed I am. You saved my life, Zachary." "You saved mine too," he said. "I was just going through the motions before you, working, existing, but not really living. You taught me what it means to truly live. We saved each other then. I suppose we did." The years passed quickly after that. The children grew, each of them developing their own personalities and interests. Thomas was quiet and thoughtful, always with his nose in a book. Sarah was wild and adventurous, constantly climbing trees and exploring the prairie. William was sweet and gentle, with a gift for working with animals that rivaled his father's. Luna taught until her youngest started school, then retired to focus on her family and her writing. She had started composing children's stories in her spare time, and a publisher in Kansas City had agreed to print a collection. The book sold well, and she began working on a second. Zachary's horse breeding business flourished. He became known throughout Kansas as a man who produced quality animals and dealt fairly. He hired several hands to help with the work, young men who reminded him of himself at that age, hungry for opportunity and willing to work hard. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Zachary surprised Luna with a trip to Kansas City. They left the children with Charles and Martha Garrett, who doted on them like grandparents, and spent 3 days in the city. They saw a play at the theater, ate at fancy restaurants, stayed in a real hotel with hot running water, but both of them were happy to return home, to their land and their children and their simple life. The city was exciting, but it was not home. Their fourth and final child, a daughter they named Elizabeth, was born when Luna was 34. She was an unexpected blessing, arriving nearly 5 years after William, and she was adored by her older siblings. Elizabeth had her father's dark hair and her mother's sharp mind, and from the moment she could walk, She was following her mother around, asking endless questions. Zachary was 40 when Elizabeth was born, and he sometimes felt the ache of age in his bones after a long day's work. But he was happy, deeply and truly happy, in a way he had never imagined possible back when he was a solitary cowhand riding the prairie. The children grew and eventually began leaving home. Thomas went to study law in Topeka. Sarah married a neighboring rancher's son and stayed nearby, much to Luna's delight. William took over the day-to-day operations of the horse breeding business, working alongside his father. Elizabeth announced at 16 that she wanted to be a teacher like her mother, and Luna could not have been prouder. Ordway changed too over the years. The railroad came through in 1885, bringing new people and new opportunities. The town grew from 300 people to nearly 1,000. New businesses opened, and the school expanded again to accommodate all the students. Through it all, Zachary and Luna remained at the center of the community. They were respected elders, the couple whose love story had become legendary in Ordway. People still talked about the day Zachary found Luna wandering the prairie, about how they had built a life together from nothing. On their 30th anniversary, the town threw them a celebration. Nearly everyone in Ordway attended, cramming into the church hall for a dinner and dance. Their children and grandchildren were there. 3 generations gathered to honor the love that had started it all. Zachary stood to give a speech, though public speaking had never been his strength. He cleared his throat, looking out at all the faces he knew so well. 30 years ago, I was a simple cowhand with no prospects and no plans beyond the next day's work. Then I found a woman on the prairie, and she whispered a name that changed everything. That name was Luna, and she became my wife, my partner, my everything. She taught me what it means to love, to build, to dream, and together we created this. He gestured around the room. Not just a family, though our family is our greatest joy, but a community, a life, a legacy. I am the luckiest man alive, and I thank God every day for leading me to that spot on the prairie where Luna was waiting. There was not a dry eye in the room when he finished. Luna stood and kissed him, and their children and grandchildren surrounded them, a living testament to the love that had endured for 3 decades. They lived many more years after that celebration. They watched their grandchildren grow and their great-grandchildren be born. They sat on the porch of their home and watched sunsets over the prairie they both loved so much. They held hands and told stories and laughed about the adventures they had shared. When Zachary was 72, he died peacefully in his sleep with Luna beside him. She held his hand as he took his last breath, whispering words of love and gratitude for the life they had built together. Luna lived another 5 years after Zachary passed. She spent that time surrounded by family, writing her final book, and volunteering at the school that still bore her name. When she died at 77, the entire town mourned. They were buried side by side in the Ordway Cemetery, under a large oak tree that provided shade for their graves. The headstones were simple, bearing their names and dates and a single inscription that their children had chosen. 2 souls, 1 love, forever entwined. The story of Zachary and Luna became part of Ordway's history, passed down through generations. Parents told their children about the cowboy who found a barefoot girl wandering the prairie, about how love can bloom even in the harshest conditions, about how 2 people with nothing can build everything. The school Luna founded continued to operate for more than a century, educating thousands of children. The land Zachary and Luna purchased remained in the family, passed down from generation to generation. The house they built with their own hands stood for over 100 years before finally being replaced, but the new house was built on the same spot, honoring the legacy of those who had come before. Their love story became a legend, the kind of tale that reminded people of what was possible when two hearts found each other against all odds. In a time and place where life was hard and survival was never guaranteed, Zachary and Luna had created something beautiful and lasting. And though they were gone, their love remained, woven into the very fabric of Ordway, Kansas, a testament to the power of compassion, courage, and two people who chose to build a life together when fate brought them together on a dusty prairie road in the summer of 1875. The children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren of Zachary Sullivan and Luna Thatcher carried forward the values their ancestors had embodied: hard work, kindness, community, and above all, love. The kind of love that saves lives, that builds futures, that endures beyond death. And sometimes, when the wind blew across the Kansas prairie at sunset, people swore they could feel it still, that love that had started with a barefoot girl and a cowboy who stopped to help her. It was in the soil and the grass and the endless sky, eternal and unchanging, a reminder that even in the wildest places, love can take root and flourish. The legacy of their love was not just in their descendants, or in the buildings that bore Luna's name, or in the land that still produced fine horses. It was in the story itself, in the way people still talked about them decades after they were gone, in the inspiration their lives provided to others who faced their own hardships and wondered if happiness was possible. Because Zachary and Luna proved that it was possible. They proved that love could heal trauma, that two broken pieces could come together to make something whole, that a chance encounter on a prairie road could change the course of multiple lives. And that was their greatest gift to the world, their truest legacy. Not just the family they created or the community they helped build, but the hope they represented. Hope that even in darkness, light can be found. Hope that even after devastating loss, joy can return. Hope that love, real and true and lasting, is always worth fighting for. Thomas Sullivan, their eldest son, would sometimes stand at his parents' graves and remember the stories they had told him as a child. Stories about bravery and survival, about finding home in unexpected places, about building something beautiful from the ashes of tragedy. He would tell those same stories to his own children, and they would tell them to theirs, and the love story of Zachary and Luna would never truly end, because love like theirs does not end. It transforms, it grows, it spreads outward like ripples in a pond, touching lives in ways both seen and unseen. Every child who attended the school Luna founded, every horse bred from Zachary's original stock, every person who heard their story and felt inspired to be braver, kinder, more open to love, they were all part of that legacy. The town of Ordway, Kansas, continued to grow and change with the times. The Wild West became tamed, the frontier pushed ever farther. But the spirit of those early days, the spirit of people like Zachary and Luna who had carved lives from difficult circumstances, that spirit remained. On warm summer evenings, families would gather on their porches much as Zachary and Luna had once done. They would watch their children play in yards and feel grateful for the safety and prosperity that previous generations had fought so hard to achieve. And sometimes, in those quiet moments, they would think of the stories their grandparents had told them, about a time when Kansas was young and life was hard but beautiful in its simplicity. The schoolhouse that bore Luna's name was eventually converted into a museum, preserving the history of Ordway and the people who had built it. Visitors could see the desk where Luna had taught, her collection of books, the photographs of her students over the years. They could read the letters she had written to the town council, proposing the school, outlining her vision for education in the community. And they could see the display dedicated to her love story with Zachary, featuring the account he had written late in life about finding her on the prairie that July day in 1875. His words, preserved in his own hand, told the story better than anyone else ever could. "I was alone," he had written. "I thought I was content with my solitude, but I was wrong. I was waiting, though I did not know it, for her, for Luna. When I saw her wandering through the grass, barefoot and lost, something in me recognized something in her. Two lost souls finding each other in the vastness of the prairie. She whispered a name that day, her own name, and it changed everything. It changed me. It gave me purpose and joy and a future I had never dared to imagine. If I could go back and live my life again, I would not change a single moment, because every moment led me to her, and she led me to everything that matters." That passage was inscribed on a plaque in the museum, and people would stand before it, reading the words and feeling their hearts swell with emotion. Love like that, pure and true and transformative, it reminded everyone who encountered it of what was possible, of what mattered most in life. The generations that followed Zachary and Luna continued to honor their memory in both large and small ways. Family reunions were held every 5 years at the old homestead, bringing together descendants from all over the country. They would share meals and stories, connecting with relatives they might never have met otherwise, all of them linked by the love of two people who had met by chance on a Kansas prairie. And in Ordway itself, the Sullivan name remained prominent. William's descendants continued to breed horses. Sarah's family ran the largest ranch in the county. Thomas's great-grandson became mayor, serving the town with the same dedication his ancestors had shown. Elizabeth's line produced several teachers, carrying on Luna's legacy of education. The story came full circle more than a century later, when a young man named Zachary Sullivan IV, a direct descendant of the original Zachary, became a history teacher at the school his great-great-grandmother had founded. Standing in front of his classroom for the first time, he felt the weight of legacy and history, but also the joy of connection to something larger than himself. He taught his students about the history of their town, about the people who had built it, about the challenges they had faced and overcome. And every year, on the anniversary of the day his ancestor had found Luna on the prairie, he would tell the love story that had started it all. The students would listen, captivated, and some of them would leave that classroom with a new understanding of what love could be, of what courage looked like, of how individual actions could ripple through time. The land itself seemed to hold the memory of Zachary and Luna. The prairie where they had first met was eventually protected as a nature preserve, ensuring that it would remain wild and beautiful for future generations. People would walk through that tall grass, feeling the sun on their shoulders and the wind in their hair, and they would think about a young woman, lost and frightened, and a cowboy who stopped to help her. In that way, Zachary and Luna never truly left. They remained part of the landscape, part of the story of the West, part of the collective memory of everyone who called Ordway home. Their love had literally shaped the place, creating institutions and families and traditions that endured long after they were gone. And that, in the end, was the true measure of a life well lived. Not wealth or fame or power, but the love shared and the lives touched and the legacy created. Zachary and Luna had started with nothing but each other, and from that simple beginning, they had built something that would last for generations. Their story was a reminder that every person matters, that every act of kindness ripples outward, that love is the most powerful force in the world. It was a story of hope and resilience, of two people who refused to let tragedy define them, who chose instead to build something beautiful together. And it was a love story for the ages, the kind that novelists dream of creating and historians treasure discovering. Real and true, documented in letters and photographs and living memories, passed down through families and communities, inspiring countless others to believe in the possibility of finding their own great love. In the end, that was what made their story truly remarkable. Not just that they had found each other against incredible odds, not just that they had survived and thrived in a difficult time and place, but that their love had touched so many lives, had created so much good, had proven that even in the wildest, harshest circumstances, beauty and joy and lasting happiness could be found. Zachary Sullivan had been a simple cowhand when he found Luna Thatcher wandering barefoot across the Kansas prairie in July of 1875. By the time his story ended, he was so much more: a husband, a father, a grandfather, a pillar of his community, a man whose life had mattered in ways both large and small. And Luna, the frightened survivor who had lost everything, became a beloved teacher, a published author, a mother and grandmother, a woman whose influence extended far beyond what she could have ever imagined. That day, she whispered her name to a stranger who stopped to help her. Together, they proved what two people committed to each other and to building a good life could accomplish. They proved that love conquers fear, that kindness matters, that courage comes in many forms, that family is everything, that community is built one relationship at a time, and that the choices we make, especially the choice to love wholeheartedly and without reservation, echo through time in ways we cannot predict, but can always hope for. Their love story was complete, whole, perfect in its imperfection. It had a beginning on that prairie road, a middle filled with joy and struggle and growth, and an ending that was not really an ending at all, because love like theirs never truly ends. It transforms and continues, living on in the hearts and lives of everyone it touches, forever and always, eternal as the prairie wind, and just as essential to the spirit of the West they had called home.